live action.
I'm wondering if you can just kind of flesh out a little bit about the discrepancy, not discrepancy, but like how much of this is a U.S. Russia kind of negotiation versus the multilateral. I mean, as you know, you broke off kind of bilateral talks with the Russians in terms of trying to get a ceasefire. And I know that you say that this is a more multilateral ceasefire. I'm just, where are things in terms of, you know, U.S. and Russia working together on this? You know, even though you have cut off talks on this, bilateral talks on the ceasefire, the Secretary is still talking to Foreign Minister Lavrov frequently.
Sure.
So if you could just kind of paint a picture of what's really going on.
Sure, I appreciate the question. It is very much a multilateral effort. And the meetings in Geneva followed directly from the conversation that they had at the ministerial level in Lausanne last weekend.
These are teams from all of the countries that were there?
I pretty much all of them. I can't.
Not just the U.S. and Russia.
No, absolutely not. The meetings in Geneva are not U.S.-Russia bilateral engagements on the ceasefire, the cessation of hostilities in Syria. They are multilateral, and so the representatives are from most, if not all, and I can check on that, most, if not all.
Is that including Iran?
Again, I can check on representation, but I can tell you for sure that it's not just U.S. and Russia. The suspension of U.S.-Russia bilateral engagement on the cessation of hostilities in Syria remains in effect. That doesn't mean, as I've said,
it's not really a suspension, though. It's more like an expansion into a multilateral forum.
No, I disagree,
Well, I mean,
Elise. It is a suspension. The Secretary is not having bilateral engagement with Foreign Minister Lavrov on this specific issue, and more importantly, our teams.
You spoke to him this morning.
Of course, they're going to have a dialogue. What I'm saying is they aren't sitting across the table as they were in Geneva in September, actually trying to negotiate the particulars.
Well,
that is now being done. That is now being done by a multilateral team in Geneva, and that's what they're doing. But I want to be clear, and I said it at the time, it doesn't mean that we're not going to talk to Foreign Minister Lavrov. It doesn't mean that we aren't going to talk to the Russians about what's going on in Syria. It would be foolhardy to do that, since they have such a huge influence on the Assad regime, and they're huge stakeholders in the process. What it means is, with respect to the cessation of hostilities, we are now moving towards a more multilateral format, which obviously does include Russia. So there's, of course, going to be conversations with them inside of that.
But, I mean, even when he's talking to Foreign Minister Lavrov in these conversations, they're still talking about this multilateral ceasefire.
Sure, but they aren't doing individual bilateral negotiations over the particulars the way they were before.
But over the phone.
Well, isn't
doing this over the phone instead of sitting?
No, that's not what I said.
But is
Michelle.
this? I mean, I know you did it in the beginning because the Russians were not being cooperative, and you felt that. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to say it was a punishment to Russia, but it was more of a kind of acknowledgement that it wasn't productive. But
Suspension.
Suspension.
Correct.
But I mean, isn't this more of a productive way of doing it, considering the U.S. and Russia are not the only parties in there? And
I think that remains to be seen, how productive it's going to be. I think that's what we got to figure out in Geneva right now. If this can be more productive. Clearly, we felt that U.S.-Russia bilateral engagement was a good vehicle to try to get a cessation of hostilities, and it didn't work. And it didn't work because Russia didn't meet their commitments. And so, yes, we suspended it.
So what makes you think that Russia's going to meet its commitments now that there are other countries involved?
I don't know that they will. I can't predict that. I think that's a better question put to people in Moscow. What I can tell you is the Secretary's not going to give up on the effort. And since we have suspended U.S.-Russia bilateral engagement on this particular issue, we are left. We always had multilateral vehicles at the same time, but now we're left with that as the only process to pursue. And we'll see where it goes. As I mentioned to Arshad, I mean, we'll know in coming days, how successful that's going to be. I couldn't possibly predict the result, and I wouldn't be able to predict Russia's willingness and ability to meet whatever new commitments might fall on them as a result of this discussion. Yeah.